Welcome, loves. Kathy here. Thanks for stopping by my channel. It is a pleasure to have you. If you watched my previous video, you already know I'm not a big fan of small talk. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the topic, which is signs and wonders. But if you didn't get a chance to catch my last video, please go check it out. The link will be in the description. The following video is meant to enlighten, encourage, and inspire and educate and enjoy. The topics mentioned in this video are based on my faith and spiritual journey. It is not meant to replace your spiritual practice or matters concerning your mental health or emotional health care. Everyone is welcome. Glean from what is helpful and useful and leave the rest. So, as I was saying, signs and wonders, why are they normal in the life of a child of God? And what are their purposes? Well, signs and wonders are not necessarily for the believer alone, but for those who don't believe as well. Signs and wonders are occurrences that invade the natural realm as evidence of the reality of the spiritual realm. In my last video, I mentioned Moses seeing the burning bush. No doubt, the sight of that was a shock to his system. It literally caught his undivided attention. It was like a, glitch in the matrix, for lack of a better word or term. Although the spiritual realm is just as real as the physical realm. But because God chose to reveal himself in the form of a sign and wonder, Moses was open to receive what God was trying to communicate with him. I don't know about anybody else, but when I used to read the miraculous stories of the saints of the Old Testament and the New Testament, I felt kind of far removed because I assumed these people were special cases and things like this only happened with them. When a person is shown a sign of wonder, it shakes them up and dismantles the idea that God is distant from us and that we don't have access to him in that way. The sign of wonder acts as an undeniable presence of God, waiting for us to be on the other side of the miracle, ready to be in connection with his beloved creation. A while back in 2018, I had an experience unlike I've ever felt before. After church service, we are usually given the opportunity to approach the altar for prayer. I needed prayer, so I went up to the front, and the pastor laid his hands on my forehead, and I felt an unusual sensation. Now, I kept what happened to myself because I didn't want anybody to take away what had happened to me and dismiss it as something that was of the devil rather than a miraculous encounter with God. You see, I've learned the hard way something should be left between you and God, because not everyone in church is there for the right reason. Some treat it as a social gathering, and some go out of obligation, and some even go for nefarious reasons. So I knew I should use discernment. And I decided to ask my brother, since we were going through similar faith journeys as one another. But he couldn't even give me an answer. So I did something I couldn't imagine doing several years ago. I went to the spiritual community, and there I found my answers. You see, with signs and wonders, it can get your attention in such a way that it causes you to open your mind to receiving new information. Sort of like when Jesus was performing miracles. They got people's attention and made them curious about what he had to say. So I went and searched the spiritual community and finally found my answers. But it didn't just stop there. From there, I was able to experience God like I hadn't before. I received healing for what I feels like I've been battling for most of my life with people-pleasing and low self-worth. I grew in the knowledge of who God was and who I was in him. and I began to start to love myself unconditionally along with others. When Moses fled out of Egypt, he ran to safety, but he lost his way. He no longer had the false identity that was placed on him in his youth, yet he was alienated from his God, his people, and his identity. The spiritual community would call that an ego death. So Moses clung to what was only left for him. The old identity had died, and he no longer had access to the man he was. It was a perfect moment in his life for an encounter with God through a sign and wonder. In a way, I can feel I can relate to Moses' stories. In the previous video, I spoke briefly about my Jonah experience. At the end of all of it, I had to flee from an abusive, toxic situation with my ex. I was so broken, and the old Kathy was a distant memory. The safe place where I fled to was all I had to cling on to. I stood there a while until the memory of the experience I got with God when the pastor laid his hands on me came back to my memory once more. The memory got my attention in such a way that it provoked me to search for the answers. Moses' encounter with God through a sign and wonder led him to God, to his people, and to be established in his true identity. And the same thing happened with me. The encounter I had with the laying of hands from a pastor led me to be closer with God. It connected me more to my humanity. It helped me understand my true nature. And not to mention, I grew immensely in my spiritual gifts. Now this is all important, especially when it comes to opening us up to new information that we need to receive. But it isn't the only reasons why we experience signs and wonders. They're extremely important to the life of a believer. Signs and wonders can serve as a focal point in the time where it requires us to have a great deal of patience and faith. Think about the stretch of time when it comes to seed time and harvest. When a seed is planted, it takes some time for the seed to actually take root and dig down deep in the soil and draw its nutrients so it can actually grow into a seedling. During this time, it takes a lot of patience to actually wait for the seedling to actually appear above the ground. Seed time and harvest kind of reminds me of the life of a believer. Remember when I said I felt kind of far removed because I just read about the experiences of the Old Testament saints and the New Testament saints when it came to miracles. But when signs and wonders occur in our lives, it brings us closer to the idea that God isn't so distant. So we can use that as an anchor in those times of places where we have to have a lot of patience. You see, the enemy of our soul knows that's at our most vulnerable stage in our walk, when we have to wait. In that moment in time, he can plant seeds of doubt into anybody's mind. Say you're believing God for a healing and a word was spoken over you, and you experience a sign and wonder beforehand, so you know what God is capable of, and you read his word, which acts as water to nourish that seed of faith. So you have both of the sign and wonder and his word accompanying you on your journey when you have to be patient. But it won't stop the enemy from planting seeds of doubt in you. He'll tell you things like, did God really say that you're going to be healed? Maybe you're just making this up in your own mind. yeah, I think you're a little bit delusional about this. You might as well just give up believing, and so on until your faith is very weak. But we have those signs and wonders to call us back, to believe we serve the God of the impossible. He is our Father, and He cares about us. And even though it may look like nothing's happening, God is waiting for the right moment and the right time to fulfill the word in your life. Just like the seed takes time to germinate and turn into a seedling, the word that He spoke over you takes time for it to come into fruition. In 2018, I had what I call the year of miracles. I mean, God really showed up and showed out. I couldn't believe the things I was witnessing and experiencing. I mean, I remember me, my mom, and my daughter had absolutely no job or no income, but we had everything we needed and more. I remember going to church one service, and the pastor's wife prophesied over me. She said, "I know it seems impossible, Kathy, but God is with you." Now, I thought it was for one specific thing. Now that I'm looking back on things, I think it was just a reminder that God is with me always for all things. A year had passed by, and I moved away from the area in which I was attending church to move with my mom. And things had got progressively worse. You see, me and my mom really didn't get along that well. It was a very toxic and abusive situation between us. And I don't think she wanted me there anymore. And to be quite honest, I didn't want to be there anymore. Before we moved, I put in for an apartment, believing some way, somehow, that God would open the door for us to get it. You see, I didn't have a job, and my daughter had a job, but it was not quite enough to meet our needs as far as rent is concerned. But these apartments would work with our income. So I applied anyway, despite our circumstances. Well, we all moved, and I didn't hear from the apartment complex. So I knew I had to wait. In the meantime, I was being pressured to sign a lease that I didn't want to be a part of for my mother's apartment. And I was really tempted to go into the women's shelter because I was being threatened if I didn't sign the lease. But I refused to sign the lease. And God told me, "I didn't tell you to go in the shelter. I told you to go with her, but just don't sign the lease." So I listened. You see, if the enemy can get you from the negative thoughts and the fearful thoughts he bombards you with, he'll use other people to threaten you and get you to not to trust in God. But I was determined to hold on to my faith. I had the experience of the signs and wonders from the year before. Plus I had the word spoken over me. Plus I was actively seeking God and reading the word, trying to get to know Him, trying to get to know His heart and His character. When I was in a certain church that kind of led me astray to believe God was something else than who He really is, I always viewed God as somebody who's always mad at me and disappointed in me, and not as a loving Father that just wants to be in connection with His beloved creation and show them that he's love. He's the very essence of love. But I thought of him in the opposite way. I think it was a completely different God that I was serving and worshiping than the actual God of the Bible. By learning who he was through the Word, and by knowing how he operates through the signs and wonders, I was able to use those two things to anchor myself in faith. It caused me to almost be militant when it comes to faith. I mean, I even got my daughter into it. I wouldn't allow her to let me say that the apartment my mother had was our apartment. I made her correct me whenever I said our apartment. I had to say the apartment or my mom's apartment instead. My mom would try to argue with me and say, when are you going to get your own place? You need to get your own place. And I would just tell her, I will, when God provides a way for me to get one. Don't worry about it, I will. Or when she was nicer to me, she would say, our apartment. But I would soon correct her and say, Mom, this is not my apartment. This is your apartment. So it happened one day. 4 months later, I got a call from the apartment building we applied for, and they approved us. But I had very little money, and my daughter was the only one working, so we didn't have enough for the deposit. But fortunately, when God answers your prayers, he doesn't just do it halfway. He does it all the way, and just above anything you can ever imagine he would do. My pastor at the church I was attending before he moved offered to help us out with a deposit. Now, I didn't even have to ask him. He volunteered. God just put it on his heart to help me out in that manner. And then when my sister found out that we didn't have enough to move in, she said, I'm not going to let that stop you from moving in. I will help you out with the money. So we had all the money we needed to move in. And I often worried how we were going to get all our stuff from the storage to our apartment. My stepdad helped me out with our storage. And then I had to figure out how are we going to move all our stuff. At first, I was going to take it a little bit at a time. But friends from church found out that we had to move. So her and her brother volunteered, along with other people, 3 young men, helped me move all our stuff in our apartment. And I just was blown away by everything that happened. It just happened one thing after the other. God had just taken care of everything. Not only did God supply all our needs above and beyond what we could ever imagine, but also he even gave me a desire of mine. You see, when I was staying at my mom's apartment, somebody had thrown out a hutch, and I thought it was so cute. I thought I could repurpose it, but unfortunately it was full of roaches. Ew. But the day that I had to move, my friend was talking to a man who just happened to be cleaning out his storage, and he had this hutch, and he gave it to her, and then she turned around and gave it to me. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it just reminded me of the scripture where it says, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And not only did he meet our needs and exceed our expectations, but he even gave me something that I really wanted beforehand but couldn't have. See how important signs and wonders are? They're not only just important as learning the word and just learning about God, but we have to experience Him. It's like I said twice before in the video, that unless we have that experience of God, it's gonna feel like He's far removed from us. But having a miracle happen, seeing a sign and wonder, gives you proof that there is a God above, and it's not just a person that's distant, written on the pages of a book, but He's real and He's with us. The examples of Moses' story and my own testimony reminds me of when Jesus came to redeem His people. The people witnessed signs and wonders performed by Jesus to show them God wasn't as distant as they thought. Which is why I believe Jesus was appropriately given the name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Coupled by the message from the Word of God in the flesh, who is Jesus, the promised one spoken about by the prophets of the Old Testament, led the people to have faith, brought them back in connection with their loving Creator, united them as one, and gave them a new identity as sons and daughters of God. You see, signs and wonders are not only powerful demonstrations to draw us closer to God, but are necessary to bring us to faith and glory to glory, just as God promised us. We are His workmanship, and He never stops working on our behalf. So with that, I'm going to end the video, and I'm going to turn things over to you guys. How has the presence of signs and wonders affected you as a child of God? Please feel free to share with us. It'll be a blessing to hear from you. And who knows, your story might bless and inspire others too. That's it for now, guys. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to show some love with a like and comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Well, that's all, my friends. I love you all. God's blessings to you. Bye.